Welcome, weary traveler, to this cozy little corner of history. Tonight, before we step into a world of ancient myths and forgotten empires, allow me to offer you a warm greeting. Whether you're curled up under blankets, preparing to drift into sleep, or simply seeking a gentle story from the past to soothe your evening, I'm truly grateful you've joined me. If you don't mind, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Feel free to share it in the comments. It's always a joy to see this community of history lovers connecting across so many places. And if you enjoy calm, immersive journeys into the past, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. But for now, let's leave behind the modern world and travel back to an age when gods rose from chaos and the streets of Rome echoed with the footsteps of the forgotten. Greek mythology, the cosmic dawn. In the beginning, there was nothing. No earth, no sky, no sea. No sun to mark the days or moon to soften the night. There was only chaos, boundless, silent, formless. To the ancient Greeks, chaos was not simply emptiness, but potential, a yawning gulf from which all things could emerge, raw and unshaped. Out of this void came the first primordial beings, eternal and immense, their existence predating even the concept of time. Foremost among them was Gaia, the earth. She was both land and mother, soil and womb. From her broad back would rise mountains and valleys, forests and plains. From her depths would flow the rivers and springs that nourished life. Gaia was steady, enduring, and patient, embodying the permanence of the ground beneath mortal feet. Soon after her appeared Tartarus, the deep abyss beneath the earth, a realm of darkness and punishment that would later house defeated gods and monstrous beings. Alongside them emerged Nyx, the night, cloaking the void in shadow, and Erebus, the darkness of the underworld. These first powers were neither fully personal nor wholly abstract. They were at once forces of nature and divine presences, timeless, yet capable of desire and fear. From Gaia herself arose Uranus, the sky. He spread across her vast expanse, a dome of blue by day and star-flecked black by night. Sky and earth embraced, and in their union was born the first generation of divine children, the Titans. 12 in number, the Titans embodied elemental and cosmic forces. Oceanus represented the encircling waters that bordered the known world. Hyperion and Theia embodied the radiance of sun and light. Coes and Phoebe were associated with intellect and prophecy. Themis represented divine law and order. Mnemosyne, memory itself. Powerful and primeval, the Titans governed the early cosmos in relative harmony. Yet Gaia and Uranus birthed more than the Titans. From their union also came the Cyclops, one-eyed giants of prodigious skill, destined to forge weapons of unimaginable power. With them came the Hecatoncheires, beings so fearsome that even gods recoiled at their sight. Each of these monstrous children possessed 100 hands and 50 heads, embodiments of chaos and brute strength. To Uranus they were an abomination, a threat to his rule and to the fragile order he sought to impose upon the universe. Uranus, driven by fear and revulsion, cast these children down into the depths of the earth, imprisoning them within Gaia's very body. The earth groaned under the weight of her buried offspring. Mountains buckled, valleys cracked, and rivers shifted course in her agony. Gaia's maternal grief turned to rage. She loved all her children, monstrous or not, and Uranus's cruelty was an affront to her very being. From this resentment, rebellion took root. Gaia's vengeance was deliberate. In the hidden places beneath the world, she fashioned a sickle from the hardest flint, jagged and unyielding. This weapon, she knew, could sever even the sky himself. Yet wielding it would require courage beyond her own, for she could not strike Uranus directly. Instead, she called upon her Titan children, urging them to rise against their tyrannical father and free their imprisoned siblings. But fear gripped them. To oppose Uranus, who loomed over them each night, was unthinkable. One by one they refused, save for the youngest, Cronus. Cronus was ambitious, shrewd, and unburdened by the reverence that bound his elder siblings. He stepped forward and accepted his mother's weapon, swearing to overthrow Uranus and claim the heavens for himself. Gaia hid him in ambush, and when Uranus descended to embrace her once more, Cronus struck. With a single blow, he severed his father's power, casting his blood and seed across the earth and sea. From these spilled essences arose new beings, the Erinyes, or Furies, spirits of vengeance who punished crimes against kin. The giants, fierce and untamed. And from the foam upon the waves emerged Aphrodite, goddess of love and desire, whose beauty would one day ignite wars among gods and mortals alike. Fallen and defeated, Uranus retreated into the heavens, cursing his son with his final breath. Just as Cronus had risen against his father, so too would one of Cronus's own children rise against him. The prophecy was set, unescapable this fate itself. With Uranus overthrown, Cronus assumed rulership of the cosmos. He gathered his fellow Titans and divided the world among them, establishing a new divine order. The reign of Cronus, later remembered as a golden age by mortals, was not without its shadows. Fear haunted the new king, for he could not forget his father's curse. To forestall the prophecy, Cronus resolved to destroy his future rivals before they could rise against him. Thus, when his wife and sister Rhea bore him children, Cronus devoured them at birth. One by one, the newborn gods disappeared into his mouth. Hestia, goddess of the hearth; Demeter, goddess of the harvest; Hera, future queen of the heavens; Hades, lord of the underworld; and Poseidon, ruler of the seas. Rhea wept, powerless to save her children. Her grief echoed Gaia's own from generations before, a cycle of parental cruelty repeating itself across divine history. Yet when her sixth child was born, Rhea's despair turned to defiance. She resolved to save this infant, to break the cycle of devouring and rebellion. Journeying to the island of Crete, she hid her newborn in a secret cave on Mount Ida. In place of the child, she swaddled a stone and presented it to Cronus, who swallowed it without question. The saved infant was named Zeus. Raised in secret by nymphs and guarded by the Curetes, warriors whose clashing shields drowned out his cries, Zeus grew strong and cunning. He learned of his siblings' fate and of the prophecy that bound his father's rule. From the beginning, his life was shaped by destiny, to challenge Cronus, to free his brothers and sisters, and to usher in a new order of gods, the Olympians. As Zeus matured, the world around him shifted. The Titans, though mighty, grew complacent in their power, while unrest stirred among the imprisoned Cyclops and Acontekyres deep within the earth. Gaia herself, ever watchful, foresaw another war looming, greater than the one that had toppled Uranus. The heavens, the earth, and the abyss would soon clash in a battle that would reshape the cosmos forever. Cronus, sensing the threat, tightened his grip on power. Yet prophecy cannot be silenced, and the wheel of fate turned inexorably toward conflict. The stage was set for the Titanomachy, the great war between generations, a struggle not merely for dominion, but for the very order of creation. The cycle begun with chaos and continued through Uranus and Cronus would soon pass to Zeus, whose thunder would echo across myth and memory alike.
The Olympian Revolt. Hidden in the cave on Mount Ida, Zeus grew far from his father's sight, nurtured by forces loyal to his mother Rhea and to Gaia, who still watched over her descendants with quiet resolve. The infant god suckled on the milk of Amalthea, a divine goat whose horns were said to overflow with bounty, and when the child cried, the Curetes clashed their bronze shields and stamped their feet in wild rhythms, drowning out the sound lest Cronus hear and descend in wrath. In this secluded cradle, Zeus's destiny ripened, each passing season drawing him closer to the role fate had foretold: challenger, liberator, ruler. As he reached maturity, Zeus gazed out over the rugged mountains and broad seas of the world he would inherit. He saw the suffering of his siblings, swallowed alive and trapped in darkness within Cronus's belly, and he resolved to free them. But open defiance would be folly. Cronus ruled the cosmos with immense power, supported by loyal titans who feared upheaval. To triumph, Zeus would need allies, beings of cunning and strength who could tip the scales of war. Zeus's first act of rebellion was a work of stealth and guile. In disguise, he approached his father's court and won a place among the attendants of Cronus. There he served humbly, concealing his true identity until the moment came to strike. With the aid of Metis, a titaness renowned for her wisdom and craft, Zeus prepared a potion of emetic power, brewed from herbs of the deep earth and waters of hidden springs. This potion he offered to Cronus, disguised as a simple draught of wine. Unwitting, Cronus drank, and agony seized him. One by one, the swallowed children were disgorged. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, emerging fully grown and radiant, reborn into the light. Freed at last, the siblings gathered around Zeus, pledging allegiance to the brother who had restored them. In that moment, the Olympian family was born. They were gods of the new order: Zeus, master of thunder and sky; Poseidon, ruler of the seas; Hades, lord of the underworld; Hera, queen of marriage and birth; Demeter, goddess of harvest; and Hestia, guardian of hearth and home. United, they swore to overthrow Cronus and the elder Titans, to end the tyranny that had begun with Uranus and perpetuated by Cronus himself. But the task ahead was monumental. Cronus commanded the loyalty of most Titans, Menoetius, Iapetus, Crius, and Hyperion among them, whose power over the elements and stars rivaled that of the younger gods. The universe itself trembled as war erupted, the Titanomachy, a struggle that would last 10 years and reshape the very fabric of creation. The war began in chaos. Mountains were hurled as weapons, seas boiled, and storms split the sky. The Titans, older and immense, wielded raw force, their blows shaking the foundations of the world. The Olympians, younger and swifter, relied on cunning and the leadership of Zeus, whose command of thunder and lightning became their rallying force. Yet for all their might, neither side could gain decisive advantage. The battlefield stretched across heaven and earth, through forests and plains, from Olympus to the depths of Tartarus. Each clash of divine power echoed across creation, felt in every stone and stream. In the midst of stalemate, Zeus sought new allies. Guided by Gaia, he descended into the abyss of Tartarus, where the Cyclopes and hundred-handed ones lay bound in chains, imprisoned by Cronus since the dawn of his reign. These monstrous beings, wronged by the elder Titans, listened to Zeus's plea and pledged their loyalty in exchange for freedom. With mighty blows, Zeus shattered their bonds and brought them forth into the war. The Cyclopes, master smiths of the divine forge, repaid Zeus with gifts of power unmatched. For Zeus they crafted the thunderbolt, a weapon of crackling lightning and deafening roar, capable of splitting mountains and burning foes to ash. For Poseidon they forged the trident, a spear whose strike could shatter the seas and summon earthquakes. For Hades they created the helm of darkness, a crown of shadow that rendered its wearer unseen, allowing him to move unseen even among gods. Armed with these weapons, the Olympians renewed their assault. The 100-handed ones hurled boulders with such force that mountains shattered. Their 50 heads bellowed war cries that drowned the roars of Titans. Zeus unleashed his thunderbolts in blinding storms, hurling bolt after bolt until the heavens blazed white with fire. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, sending waves surging across the land and quakes rippling through the mountains. Hades, invisible beneath his helm, struck at the Titans' flanks, sowing terror and confusion in their ranks. After 10 years of unrelenting conflict, the balance shifted. One by one, the Titans fell. Hyperion, Iapetus, Crius, and Menoetius were driven back and subdued. Even mighty Cronus, king of the Titans, was at last overwhelmed, battered by the combined might of his children, and cast down in defeat. The war ended not with mercy, but with exile. The vanquished Titans were hurled into Tartarus, imprisoned behind bronze gates and walls of unyielding stone, guarded for eternity by the 100-handed ones who once had shared their bondage. With the Titans dethroned, the Olympians ascended to rule. The cosmos, shattered by war, was remade and divided among the victorious brothers. Zeus claimed the sky, throned upon high Olympus as king of gods and mortals alike. Poseidon took dominion over the seas, his trident stirring the deep waters of the world. Hades accepted the underworld, the silent realm of the dead, where he ruled with stern impartiality. The earth itself remained common ground, shared among all gods and mortals. The new order was established, yet the shadow of prophecy lingered. Just as Cronus had overthrown Uranus and Zeus had overthrown Cronus, so too would the cycle of power and rebellion continue. The gods themselves were not immune to jealousy, desire, or pride. Their quarrels would shape the fates of heroes and kingdoms. Their loves and vendettas would spill into the mortal world, weaving divine drama into human history. The Olympian age had begun. From their shining halls atop Mount Olympus, the gods watched over the world below, sometimes protectors, sometimes tormentors, always reflections of the very humanity that worshipped them. It was in this new age that the myths of Prometheus and Pandora, of heroic labors and tragic fates would unfold, myths that sought to explain why mortals suffered, why they hoped, and how they endured.
Prometheus and Pandora. Long after the Titanomachy had ended and the new gods claimed their thrones atop Olympus, the world below remained largely barren. The seas rolled endlessly, the mountains rose in silent grandeur, and forests swayed to the whisper of unseen winds. But there was no mortal voice, no laughter or lament to break the stillness. The gods ruled over a cosmos of elements, yet there were no beings to till the earth, to offer prayer, or to marvel at the wonders of creation. It was into this silence that Prometheus stepped. Prometheus was a Titan, yet unlike his brethren who had fallen in the great war, he had sided with Zeus and the Olympians. Known as the Forethinker, he possessed a mind more attuned to craft and cunning than to brute force. Where other Titans embodied vast cosmic powers, the sun, the moon, the oceans, Prometheus embodied intellect. He foresaw consequences, weighed possibilities, and understood the subtleties of creation. In him burned a compassion rare among the gods. He looked upon the empty world and imagined beings who might give it meaning. From the clay of the earth and the water of streams, Prometheus shaped the first humans. He molded them carefully, not as giants or monsters, but in the likeness of the gods themselves, upright and noble in form, yet fragile in body. He gave them limbs for labor, faces for expression, and minds capable of wonder and curiosity. Where the gods were immortal, humanity was mortal, destined to age and die. Yet in their finite span lay a spark of greatness, for they could strive, learn, and grow. Zeus, observing this new race, regarded them with ambivalence. He recognized their potential, but feared their audacity. The gods, though supreme, were not blind to the cycles of rebellion that had shaped their own rise to power. If mortals grew too powerful, might they too challenge divine authority one day? Thus, Zeus decreed strict boundaries. Humans would live in simplicity, bereft of divine tools or fire. They would worship the gods, offer sacrifices, and accept their place in the cosmic hierarchy. Prometheus, however, pitied his fragile creations. He saw them shivering in the cold, scavenging raw food from the wild, fearful of beasts and darkness. Their days were short and harsh, their nights longer still. Without fire, they could not cook, forge, or protect themselves. And so, moved by sympathy and defiance, Prometheus resolved to steal what Zeus had forbidden. From the forge of Hephaestus, or some say from the chariot of the sun itself, Prometheus stole the divine flame. Concealing it within a hollow stalk of fennel, he carried the fire down from Olympus and placed it in human hands. At once, the world transformed. Flames leapt high in mortal hearths, driving back the shadows. With fire, humans learned to cook their food, to temper metals, to craft weapons and tools. They built homes, tamed animals, and kindled the first sparks of civilization. In giving fire, Prometheus had given humanity power, the power to create, to destroy, and to dream beyond their station. But no gift to mortals passed unnoticed by Zeus. Enraged at Prometheus's theft, the king of the gods sought vengeance, not only upon the Titan, but upon the human race itself. Prometheus was seized and bound to a lonely peak in the Caucasus Mountains, shackled by unbreakable chains. There, exposed to wind and storm, he endured a punishment as eternal as it was cruel. Each day an eagle descended upon him to feast upon his liver, and each night the organ regenerated only to be torn anew with the dawn. For ages uncounted, Prometheus suffered in solitude, his agony a testament to the cost of defiance. Zeus's wrath did not end with Prometheus. Determined to burden humanity with suffering, he conceived a punishment more insidious than chains or torment, a gift that would bring both beauty and ruin. From the earth, Hephaestus sculpted a woman of flawless form, breathing life into clay with the skill of a master artisan. Each Olympian bestowed upon her a gift. Aphrodite granted beauty and charm, Hermes a silvery tongue and cunning wit, Athena skill in crafts and curiosity, Hera a sense of dignity and allure. Even Zeus himself bestowed a gift, insatiable curiosity, both blessing and curse. She was named Pandora, all-gifted, the first woman of mankind. Into Pandora's hands, Zeus placed a sealed jar, or later tales would call it a box, within which were contained countless unseen evils, sickness, toil, envy, hunger, despair, and all the miseries that would afflict humanity for all time. Only one thing lay apart from these evils: hope. small and fragile, resting quietly at the jar's bottom. When Pandora descended among mortals, her beauty captivated them, and despite warnings, she opened the jar. In an instant, the evils burst forth, winged and shrieking, scattering across the earth. Pestilence crept into human bodies, jealousy poisoned hearts, labor bent backs and wearied limbs. Death itself, once distant, became an ever-present shadow. Panicked, Pandora slammed the lid shut, but it was too late. All the evils had escaped, save one. Hope remained. The myths do not speak with one voice about hope's meaning. Some say it lingered within the jar to comfort humankind, a gentle balm amid endless suffering. Others claim it remained trapped as yet another cruelty, forever withheld, teasing mortals with dreams that would never be fulfilled. Yet perhaps the duality is the point. Hope is both solace and torment, a fragile flame that sustains even as it reminds us of what we lack. Through Prometheus and Pandora, the Greeks explained the paradox of human existence. We are creatures born of earth, yet reaching toward the divine, endowed with creativity, yet bound by suffering. Our greatest innovations arise from defiance, our deepest miseries from gifts we did not fully understand. The myth framed every joy and sorrow, every feast and famine, as part of a cosmic balance. Even suffering, they believed, served a purpose. It humbled mortals, reminding them of their place in the grand order of things. Over time, these myths would evolve, retold in new lands and tongues. The Romans, inheriting Greek stories, would rename the gods, but preserve their essence. Prometheus became a symbol of noble rebellion, Pandora a cautionary figure of curiosity and consequence. The jar itself, an object both sacred and dangerous, entered the lexicon of metaphor, invoked any time human ambition courted disaster. Yet beneath the divine drama, these stories revealed profound truths about the human condition. The hunger for knowledge, the defiance of limits, the persistence of hope, these traits defined not only mythic heroes, but ordinary people struggling in every age. The fire Prometheus gave was more than literal flame. It was the spark of culture, technology, and aspiration that propelled humanity from caves to cities, from darkness to light. And Pandora's jar, spilling evils into the world, captured an enduring reality. Progress and suffering are entwined, each inseparable from the other. As the myths spread westward, carried by traders, poets, and conquerors, they found fertile ground in the rising city of Rome. There, amid bustling forums and towering amphitheaters, new generations of storytellers wove Greek tales into their own cultural fabric. Zeus became Jupiter, Aphrodite became Venus, Ares became Mars. Yet for all the change in name and nuance, the essence remained. Gods reflecting human flaws, myths mirroring mortal struggles. And in Rome, as in Greece, the divide between myth and reality was stark. While poets sang of heroes and divine favor, the majority of the city's inhabitants lived in grinding poverty, their lives consumed by labor, hunger, and disease. To understand Rome fully, to see its grandeur and its cruelty, we must descend from Olympus to the crowded streets below, where the myths of gods coexisted with the harsh realities of empire. It is here, in the smoke-filled alleys and crumbling insulae of ancient Rome, that the next chapter of our story unfolds. Gods and mortals. The age of the Olympians was not an age of peace. Though the younger gods had triumphed over the Titans, their reign was marked not by serene harmony, but by ceaseless conflict. conflict among themselves, with primordial forces, and with mortals whose lives they shaped and shattered. From their lofty seat on Mount Olympus, the gods governed the world with powers beyond mortal comprehension, yet their hearts were anything but divine. They loved, envied, deceived, and avenged. Their immortal passions mirrored the very flaws and virtues of the humans who worshipped them. To the Greeks, this was not paradox, but truth. The divine was not apart from the human, but a magnified reflection of it. At the center of Olympus stood Zeus, lord of the sky and wielder of thunder. His rule brought order to the cosmos after the chaos of the Titanomachy, yet his authority was perpetually challenged by his own kin, by fate itself, and by the restless desires of his own heart. Zeus was both king and captive, bound by the prophecies that foretold his downfall, haunted by the knowledge that the cycle of rebellion might one day repeat. To secure his reign, he struck alliances and waged wars, yet he also fathered countless children, both divine and mortal, seeking to spread his lineage and influence across the world. Zeus's infidelities were legendary, inspiring as many myths as they did rivalries. His consort, Hera, queen of the gods, suffered indignity after indignity, her jealousy fueling some of the most enduring stories in Greek myth. The tale of Heracles, for instance, begins not with the hero himself, but with Hera's wrath toward Zeus's mortal lovers. In their quarrels, mortals became pawns, caught in the crossfire of divine passions. Yet Zeus was more than a philanderer. He embodied the Greek ideal of xenia, hospitality and justice toward strangers, punishing oath-breakers and rewarding those who honored the sacred bonds of guest and host. In myth, Zeus often walked the earth in disguise, testing mortals to see if they would offer kindness to the unknown traveler. These stories conveyed a moral lesson. The gods were ever watchful, and human virtue or vice could summon divine reward or retribution at any moment. If Zeus ruled by thunder, Hera ruled by pride. As goddess of marriage and childbirth, she represented the sanctity of family, yet her own marriage was a battleground. Hera's anger at Zeus's affairs extended to the children born of them, mortal and divine alike. Her relentless persecution of Heracles, whose very name, Glory of Hera, was meant to placate her, became one of mythology's defining narratives. From infancy, Hera sent serpents to kill him in his cradle. Later, she drove him to madness, causing him to murder his own family, a tragedy that set him upon the path of his famous 12 labors. Hera's wrath was not merely spiteful. It reflected deeper anxieties about legitimacy and order. In the Olympian hierarchy, lineage determined status, and Zeus's wandering affections threatened to destabilize the divine family. Hera's jealousies, though often portrayed as vindictive, underscored the fragile balance of power in Olympus, a balance perpetually tested by desire, ambition, and vengeance. Among Zeus's children, few contrasted more sharply than Athena and Ares. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war strategy, sprang fully formed from her father's head, armored and radiant, a testament to intellect and divine craftsmanship. She championed reason, law, and civic order, guiding heroes like Odysseus and Perseus with foresight and cunning. Cities like Athens revered her not only for military protection, but for the arts and sciences she inspired. Ares, by contrast, embodied the brutal chaos of battle. He relished bloodshed and strife, caring little for justice or strategy. To the Greeks, Ares represented the raw fury of combat, The screaming charge, the clash of swords, the carnage left in war's wake. Where Athena's warfare was precise and purposeful, Ares was indiscriminate, destructive for its own sake. Their opposition reflected a broader tension in Greek thought. War as both necessary and catastrophic, capable of defending civilization, yet always threatening to consume it. Aphrodite, born from sea foam, personified love and beauty, but also the turmoil they could inspire. Her allure was irresistible, ensnaring gods and mortals alike, often to tragic ends. The Trojan War itself, immortalized in Homer's epics, sprang from Aphrodite's promise to Paris that he might claim the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Desire, the myths warned, was as potent a force as thunder or sword. Hermes, messenger of the gods and patron of travelers, thieves, and merchants, embodied cunning and adaptability. With winged sandals and the silver tongue, he moved effortlessly between worlds, Olympus, Earth, and the underworld, guiding souls and delivering Zeus's decrees. Hermes' mischief and charm made him beloved among storytellers. He was a god of boundaries and transitions, of liminal spaces where the divine and mortal intersected. While the Olympians ruled from above, their influence permeated the mortal world through the exploits of heroes, figures who straddled the line between godhood and humanity. These heroes, often born of divine parentage, embodied the virtues and flaws of their patrons, serving as intermediaries between the cosmic and the human. Heracles stands foremost among them. Son of Zeus and a mortal woman, Heracles' life was shaped by Hera's enmity and Zeus's expectations. His famed 12 labors, slaying the Nemean lion, capturing the golden hind, cleaning the Augean stables, and more, were acts of atonement for crimes committed in madness, a testament to endurance and redemption. Heracles' struggles symbolized the human condition, beset by suffering, yet capable of greatness through perseverance. Perseus, aided by Athena and Hermes, slew the Gorgon Medusa and rescued Andromeda from a sea monster. His story celebrated cleverness and divine favor, illustrating how mortals might triumph over impossible odds with the gods' guidance. Theseus, legendary founder of Athens, navigated the labyrinth and slew the Minotaur, embodying civic virtue and ingenuity. Through such heroes, Greek myth explored ideals of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice, values that resonated deeply in a society that prized both individual glory and communal duty. Underlying every myth was the tension between fate and free will. The Myri, or fates, spun, measured, and cut the thread of every life, divine or mortal. Even Zeus, for all his power, could not escape their decrees. This belief in an unalterable destiny shaped Greek understanding of tragedy. Oedipus, doomed to fulfill a prophecy despite all efforts to avoid it. Achilles, fated to die young, yet immortalized in glory. Mortals might strive, gods might intervene, but the arc of destiny bent beyond the control of all. Yet within this inevitability lay room for choice. Heroes were defined not by escaping fate, but by how they met it, courageously, defiantly, or with resignation. This paradox lent Greek myth its enduring poignancy. Lives bound by destiny, yet ennobled by struggle against it. As Rome rose to power, absorbing Greek territories and culture, it inherited these myths, reshaping them to fit Roman ideals. Zeus became Jupiter, supreme among gods and guardian of the state. Hera became Juno,
patroness of marriage and protector of women. Athena became Minerva, revered not only for wisdom, but for crafts essential to Roman daily life. Ares, reimagined as Mars, shed some of his chaotic fury to embody disciplined military valor, befitting Rome's martial ethos. Roman adaptations often emphasized civic duty and the collective good over individual heroics. Where Greek heroes sought personal glory, Roman tales extolled pietas, devotion to family, gods, and country.
The myth of Aeneas, fleeing Troy to found Rome's lineage, embodied this shift. A hero less concerned with personal fame than with fulfilling destiny for the greater good of his people. Yet even as names changed and values shifted, the essence of the myths endured. The gods remained flawed and passionate, their dramas echoing human struggles. The stories continued to offer moral lessons, cautionary tales, and glimpses into the mysteries of existence. And for ordinary Romans, most of whom lived far from the marble temples and public rituals, these myths provided a framework for understanding fortune and misfortune, for seeking favor and love, war and harvest. The Olympian pantheon, in both Greek and Roman forms, served as a mirror for humanity, magnifying virtues, exaggerating vices, and projecting them onto a cosmic stage. Through myth, ancient peoples grappled with universal questions. Why do we suffer? Why do we love? What does it mean to live honorably, to die bravely, to be remembered? These questions, asked beneath the shadow of Olympus, would echo in the crowded streets of Rome, where gods and mortals coexisted in belief, if not in reality. And as the myths crossed into Rome, they entered a city whose grandeur concealed immense inequality, a world where the splendor of divine tales contrasted sharply with the harshness of daily life for the poor. To step from Olympus into Rome was to descend from myth into history, from the eternal dramas of gods to the fleeting struggles of men. It is in this descent that our narrative now turns, from the divine to the mortal, from marble halls to wooden tenements, from legend to the lived realities of empire.
Rome's hidden majority. By the time Rome rose to dominate the Mediterranean world, the myths of Greece had already been woven into its cultural fabric. Temples to Jupiter stood where once Greek altars to Zeus had been raised. Venus, goddess of love, supplanted Aphrodite in name but not in essence. Mars, reimagined from Ares, became the paragon of disciplined Roman warfare. Poets like Virgil and Ovid immortalized these deities in Latin verse, intertwining them with Rome's own legends of Aeneas, Romulus, and Remus. Yet as Rome proclaimed itself eternal, the lived reality of most Romans could not have been further from divine splendor. Rome was a city of staggering contrasts. At its height in the first centuries BCE and CE, it boasted a population approaching 1 million, a metropolis unparalleled in the ancient world. Marble temples and triumphal arches lined the forum. Aqueducts soared across valleys, carrying pure spring water from distant hills. Amphitheaters like the Colosseum hosted spectacles for tens of thousands. Senators, draped in purple-striped togas, debated laws beneath gilded ceilings, and victorious generals paraded through the streets with spoils from distant conquests, gold from Spain, grain from Egypt, slaves from Gaul and the Levant. To an outsider arriving through the city gates, Rome must have seemed the pinnacle of civilization. But beneath this veneer of grandeur lay another Rome, hidden in plain sight, teeming in the narrow alleys and crowded tenements that sprawled beyond the gleaming monuments. This was the Rome of the plebeians, freedmen, and slaves,
whose labor sustained the empire, but whose lives unfolded far from the marble palaces of the elite. Their existence was precarious, hemmed in by poverty, disease, and constant danger. For them, the myths of gods and heroes offered fleeting solace, but little relief from the realities of hunger, toil, and mortality. Wealth in Rome was concentrated in the hands of a few. The senatorial class and equestrians owned vast estates in Italy and the provinces, profiting from slave labor and imperial tribute. Their homes, domus, were sprawling complexes of atriums, peristyles, and private baths, adorned with mosaics and frescoes depicting mythic scenes. Here, patrons entertained clients, hosted banquets, and cultivated the networks of loyalty that underpinned Roman politics. Beyond these villas, however, stretched the insulae, towering apartment blocks where the urban majority lived. Built hastily from timber and cheap brick, the insulae rose 5, sometimes 6 stories high, their upper floors swaying in the wind. Rents were highest on the ground level and cheapest at the top, where access to water was limited and collapse most likely. Fires were a constant threat. A single spark from a cooking brazier could engulf an entire block, leaving hundreds homeless in a night. When the Emperor Augustus introduced building codes, it was less out of concern for the poor than to prevent chaos in the capital. Life in these insulae was claustrophobic. Families crowded into single rooms, often no larger than modern storage closets. Privacy was non-existent. Cooking, sleeping, and working took place in the same cramped space. Windows were small, ventilation poor, and staircases perilously narrow. Chamber pots were emptied into the streets below, mingling with rainwater and refuse to form rivulets of filth. The stench was omnipresent, thickened by the summer heat and the press of unwashed bodies. Vermin, rats, lice, and fleas thrived in this environment, spreading disease with relentless efficiency. For the urban poor, survival was a daily negotiation. Food was the foremost concern. Bread formed the staple of the Roman diet, supplemented by olives, lentils, and occasional scraps of meat or fish. The state provided free or subsidized grain to qualifying citizens through the annona, a policy designed as much to prevent riots as to feed the hungry. Yet the grain dough was far from sufficient. Many relied on street vendors selling cheap porridges or scavenged leftovers from the tables of the wealthy. Wine, watered and often sour, was consumed in abundance, not out of luxury, because clean water was scarce. Work was plentiful, but insecure. Day laborers hauled goods through the Forum, dock workers unloaded ships at the Tiber, and artisans toiled in workshops producing pottery, textiles, and metalware. Slaves performed the harshest tasks, quarrying stone, maintaining roads, cleaning latrines, serving as domestic attendants. For many, social mobility was limited. Freed slaves could become artisans or merchants, but prejudice lingered, and upward advancement was rare. Religion permeated every aspect of daily life. Household shrines, lararia, stood in even the humblest dwellings, honoring the Lars and Penates, protective spirits of home and hearth. Offerings of wine, oil, and incense sought blessings for fertility, health, and prosperity. Public festivals punctuated the calendar: Saturnalia in winter, Lupercalia in spring, the games of Jupiter and Mars. These events offered moments of respite when rich and poor alike mingled in revelry, roles temporarily reversed, and the burdens of poverty briefly forgotten. Yet life in Rome was perilous. Crime thrived in the labyrinthine alleys. Theft, assault, and kidnapping were common, especially after dark.
The city's narrow streets, lit only by flickering oil lamps, were treacherous. Beggars, pickpockets, and prostitutes jostled for space with carts and animals. Fires broke out frequently, devouring entire neighborhoods before the city's bucket brigades could respond. Collapsing buildings were another constant hazard. Poorly maintained insulae often gave way under their own weight, burying residents in rubble.
Disease was perhaps the greatest threat of all. Rome's impressive aqueduct systems supplied abundant water, but access was uneven. The wealthy enjoyed private pipes feeding their homes and baths, while the poor queued at public fountains where contamination was rife. Latrines, though communal and sophisticated by ancient standards, overflowed in heavy rains, spreading filth into the streets. Epidemics swept the city with devastating regularity. Measles, smallpox, and plague claimed countless lives, especially among infants and the elderly. Infant mortality was staggering. Many children died before their first birthday. Those who survived faced malnutrition, harsh discipline, and early labor. Few adults lived past 35. Death was a constant companion, woven into the rhythms of daily existence. Funerary rites for the poor were minimal. Many were buried in mass graves outside the city walls, unmarked and unremembered, their names lost even to family within a generation. For the poor, life in Rome demanded resilience and adaptability. Hope was fragile but persistent, nurtured by ritual and story. Myths of Jupiter's justice, Venus's favor, and Mars's protection offered a framework for understanding fortune and misfortune. Omens were read in the flight of birds, in dreams, in the entrails of sacrificial animals. Superstitions abounded. Amulets warded off the evil eye. Curses were scratched onto lead tablets and buried in graves. In a world where fate felt capricious, small rituals provided a sense of control. Yet resentment simmered beneath the surface. The spectacle of elite luxury, banquets overflowing with exotic foods, gilded carriages parading through the streets, stood in stark contrast to the hunger of the masses. The Roman policy of panem et circenses, bread and circuses, sought to placate the poor with grain and entertainment, but it also revealed the underlying fragility of the social order. The same crowds that cheered gladiators in the arena could, when neglected, riot in the streets, toppling statues and burning homes. Despite their anonymity, the poor built and sustained Rome. Their labor raised aqueducts and amphitheaters, paved roads that bound the empire, and manned the fleets that brought grain from distant provinces. Slaves toiled in households and farms, their sweat enriching their masters and feeding the city's insatiable appetite. Freedmen staffed the bureaucracy, managed trade, and contributed to the city's bustling economy. Without them, the empire's grandeur would have crumbled. Yet history rarely records their names. The annals of Rome celebrate consuls, emperors, and generals. The lives of laborers and washerwomen, cobblers and porters remain largely invisible. Archaeology offers fleeting glimpses, graffiti scrawled on walls, broken pottery and refuse pits, humble altars tucked into corners of tenements. These fragments, though silent, testified to lives as real and complex as those of the mighty. As Roman poets retold Greek myths, the divine dramas of Olympus were set against the backdrop of Rome's own realities. Gods walked among mortals in stories, yet most Romans knew hunger more intimately than heroism. The myths offered escape, yes, but also reflection. They explained why suffering existed, why justice was uneven, why hope endured even in hardship. Prometheus's fire symbolized ingenuity, Pandora's jar, the inevitability of toil and despair. In the smoky alleys of Rome, these ancient tales found new resonance, speaking to a populace whose lives mirrored the paradoxes of the gods they worshipped.
Hunger and water. In the popular imagination of Rome, abundance was a hallmark of empire. Poets boasted that all the world's riches flowed into the city: grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, oil from Hispania, spices from the East. The Forum bustled with markets offering everything from fresh fruit to exotic silks. The annals of history celebrated triumphal feasts where tables groaned under the weight of roasted boar, honey cakes, and amphorae of the finest Falernian wine. Yet this glittering image belonged to a narrow elite. For the vast majority of Romans, food was neither plentiful nor luxurious. Hunger, in fact, shaped daily life as profoundly as any political decree or military campaign. At the heart of Rome's food economy was grain, primarily wheat, which sustained both rich and poor. The city's sheer size made local production insufficient. Rome depended on imports from the provinces, especially the fertile Nile Valley of Egypt. Massive fleets sailed the Mediterranean, their holds packed with grain, docking at Ostia and ascending the Tiber to feed the capital. The Annona, a state-sponsored grain dole, distributed this lifeline to citizens, offering a monthly ration that kept the urban masses from starvation and, just as crucially, from rebellion. The grain dole was both charity and control. Politicians used it to curry favor. Emperors maintained it as a tool of stability. When the supply faltered, because of storms, piracy, or provincial unrest, the consequences were immediate and explosive. Riots erupted, markets were plundered, and rulers found their legitimacy imperiled. "Give them bread and circuses," Juvenal famously quipped, capturing the cynical calculation at the heart of Roman politics. Feed the people and entertain them, and they will remain docile. But the Annona was far from universal. Only registered citizens qualified, and many freedmen, slaves, and immigrants were excluded. Even for those who received it, the ration covered only part of their needs. Families supplemented their allotment with whatever they could afford: cheap porridge, stale bread, or scraps scavenged from markets. Adulteration was common. Unscrupulous bakers stretched flour with sand, bran, or even powdered chalk, grinding teeth and shortening lives. The daily bread of the poor was coarse and heavy, worlds apart from the honeyed loaves of the wealthy. Beyond grain, the Roman poor subsisted on legumes, lentils, beans, and chickpeas, providing essential protein at minimal cost. Vegetables like cabbage, onions, and leeks appeared when in season. Fruit was a rare treat. Meat was scarce, usually limited to offal or salted scraps too undesirable for the elite. Fish, abundant along the Tiber, offered occasional variety, but was often spoiled by the time it reached the markets of the inner city. Olive oil, a staple for cooking and lighting, varied widely in quality. The cheapest was rancid and thick, suitable only for the poorest households. Wine was ubiquitous, but seldom fine. The wealthy savored vintages aged in amphorae, infused with honey or spices. The poor drank sour plonk, diluted with water and sometimes thickened with resin. For many, wine was safer than water, which was often contaminated. It dulled hunger and softened hardship, though at the cost of chronic inebriation and related ailments. Public taverns, popinae, offered cheap food and drink, but were notorious for crime and disorder, frequented by laborers, gamblers, and prostitutes. Malnutrition left its mark on the body. Skeletal remains from ancient cemeteries reveal stunted growth, tooth decay, and signs of chronic anemia. Children suffered rickets from lack of vitamin D. Adults bore evidence of repetitive strain from manual labor. Life expectancy, already low, was further eroded by the cumulative toll of inadequate diet and constant exposure to disease. If Rome's food supply was precarious, its water system was a marvel of engineering and a study in inequality.
11 aqueducts carried millions of gallons daily into the city, sourced from distant springs and channeled through arches and tunnels. The Aqua Appia, Aqua Claudia, Aqua Marcia, these names became synonymous with Roman ingenuity, sustaining fountains, baths, and cisterns across the metropolis.
Yet access was stratified. The elite enjoyed private pipes feeding their villas, ensuring a constant flow of clean water for drinking, cooking, and bathing. The poor, by contrast, relied on public fountains scattered throughout the city. These fountains were communal, often crowded and vulnerable to contamination from nearby refuse. Buckets and jars carried water up the treacherous stairs of insulae, where it sat stagnant for days, breeding insects and algae in the summer heat. The contrast extended to sanitation. Rome's famed Cloaca Maxima, one of the earliest and most impressive sewer systems in the world, drained waste from central districts into the Tiber. But the vast sprawl of insulae lay beyond its reach. Chamber pots were emptied into streets or open gutters. Rain carried filth downhill, mingling with drinking water at lower elevations. Public latrines, though ingenious, multi-seated and flushed by running water, offered little privacy and spread parasites with alarming efficiency. A communal sponge on a stick, used for cleaning, was shared among all. The Roman baths, or thermae, were among the most distinctive features of urban life. More than mere hygiene, they were social and cultural hubs, offering relaxation, conversation, and even business opportunities. For a small fee, or sometimes none at all, citizens could pass through a sequence of rooms: the frigidarium, cold; tepidarium, warm; and caldarium, hot. Pools steamed, marble gleamed, and murals of gods and heroes adorned the walls. In these spaces, rich and poor mingled, stripped of status as well as clothing, if only for a moment. Yet the baths were not without danger. Overcrowding bred disease. Warm, damp environments fostered bacteria and parasites. Skin infections, eye diseases, and intestinal ailments were common. Nevertheless, the baths remained indispensable. For the poor, whose cramped quarters lacked private facilities, they provided the only chance at regular cleanliness and respite from the grime of the streets. Amid hardship, festivals offered brief reprieve. During Saturnalia, the winter feast honoring Saturn, social hierarchies inverted. Masters served slaves. Gambling and revelry abounded, and the city erupted in carnival-like abandon. At the Ludi Romani, chariot races and gladiatorial games distracted the masses from hunger and toil, their roars echoing through the Circus Maximus. Bread and circuses, panem et circenses, were more than policy. They were survival strategy, soothing discontent with spectacle and sustenance. But even in celebration, disparity was evident. While the elite reclined at banquets, savoring peacock and dormice, the poor clutched coarse loaves distributed at public games. The very structures of entertainment, amphitheaters, circuses, and theaters, were built by and for the labor of the common people, yet served to reinforce their subjugation. Spectacle diverted attention from injustice, transforming suffering of gladiators, criminals, and animals into public amusement. Despite relentless scarcity, the people of Rome endured. They adapted with ingenuity, stretching rations, sharing resources with neighbors, repurposing scraps of wood and cloth. Informal markets thrived in alleys. Community networks offered mutual aid in times of crisis. Religious rituals, household charms, and whispered prayers to the laures provided comfort in a world where divine favor felt capricious. In myths of Prometheus and Pandora, of Jupiter and Mars, they found echoes of their own struggles, gods as flawed as men, fates as unpredictable as fortune itself. This was the hidden Rome, a city sustained by invisible labor, defined by stark contrasts, and haunted by the fragility of life. Its aqueducts and amphitheaters dazzled posterity, yet its true story lay in the tenements, in the endless queue at the fountains, in the coarse bread shared among families at dusk. Here, amid hunger and hardship, the resilience of humanity shone brightest, not in marble monuments, but in the quiet determination to survive another day.
Law and punishment. Roman civilization prided itself on its legal system. To Romans, law was not merely a set of rules, but the very foundation of order, a framework that distinguished them from the barbarian peoples beyond their frontiers. Roman jurists compiled intricate codes. Magistrates presided over elaborate courts. Senators boasted that their republic, and later their empire, was built on the majesty of law. Yet beneath the rhetoric of justice lay a harsher reality. Roman law, for all its sophistication, was neither impartial nor egalitarian. It was a tool, shaped by and for the powerful, designed as much to preserve hierarchy as to dispense fairness. In Rome, one's legal standing determined one's entire existence. At the top stood the senatorial and equestrian classes, wealthy elites whose citizenship guaranteed privileges unthinkable to the poor. Beneath them were the plebeians, common citizens who enjoyed certain rights but lacked the means to defend them effectively in court. Freedmen, former slaves who had earned or been granted liberty, occupied a liminal space, free but stigmatized, their obligations to former masters lingering in subtle but binding ways. At the bottom lay slaves, who possessed no legal personhood at all. They were property, bought, sold, punished, or killed at their owner's discretion. This hierarchy extended to punishment. A crime committed by a senator might incur a fine. The same act by a slave could mean crucifixion. Citizenship acted as a shield against the harshest penalties. Roman citizens condemned to death were often allowed the honor of beheading, while non-citizens faced more agonizing fates, burning, mauling by beasts, or execution in the arena. The very methods of punishment proclaimed the value, or lack thereof, assigned to different lives. The structure of Roman society reinforced these inequalities through the patron-client relationship. Every poor citizen sought the protection of a wealthier patron, a man of influence who could provide legal aid, financial support, or introductions to political allies. In return, clients owed their patrons loyalty, public deference, and votes in elections. Each morning, clients visited their patron's house in the salutatio, lining up to greet him and receive small gifts or stipends. This ritual affirmed bonds of dependence, ensuring that even the mechanisms of justice flowed through personal favor rather than universal principle. In court, patrons often served as advocates for their clients, pleading cases before magistrates or juries. A skilled patron, like the famed orator Cicero, could sway verdicts through eloquence and charisma. But justice thus depended less on evidence than on rhetoric and reputation. Wealth bought the finest advocates. Poverty left defendants vulnerable to neglect or exploitation. Trials became performances, with outcomes shaped as much by public opinion as by legal precedent. The Forum, heart of Roman civic life, was also the stage for its justice. Trials unfolded in open air, crowds gathering to watch as accusers and defendants clashed before magistrates. The stakes were high. Conviction could mean fines, exile, enslavement, or death. Public punishments were equally visible, intended to deter as well as to avenge. Whippings were carried out in marketplaces. Thieves were branded on their forehead with the letter F for fur, thief. More serious crimes invited spectacle. Crucifixions lined the roads, a grim warning to all who passed. Condemned criminals were hurled from the Tarpeian rock, their bodies dashed upon the stones below. The amphitheater served as another venue for justice, if justice it could be called. Here, execution blurred with entertainment. Criminals and prisoners of war were forced to fight wild beasts or each other, their deaths cheered by tens of thousands. The Colosseum's spectacles, celebrated in Roman literature, masked the brutality of the practice. State-sanctioned killing repackaged as public amusement, reaffirming the power of empire over life and death. Roman law was as much about control as it was about order. Harsh penalties reinforced social hierarchies. Fear kept the masses in check. Slave revolts, such as the uprising led by Spartacus in 73 BCE, terrified the elite and provoked brutal reprisals. Thousands of captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies left to rot as a warning to others. Political dissent met similar fates. Conspirators against the state were executed or exiled, their property confiscated, their names condemned to oblivion through damnatio memoriae, the official erasure of memory. Even religious practice was bound to law. Public rituals honored the state gods, reinforcing loyalty to Rome itself. Foreign cults, like those of Isis or Mithras, were tolerated only when they posed no threat to civic unity. Christians, refusing to sacrifice to the emperor's genius, were deemed seditious and punished accordingly. In this way, law and religion worked hand in hand, binding subjects not only through coercion, but through shared ritual and belief. Yet it would be wrong to view Roman law solely as oppression. Its innovations, contracts, property rights, wills, and legal precedents were remarkable for their time and left an enduring legacy. The principle that laws should be written and publicly known, first enshrined in the 12 Tables, inspired later legal traditions. Concepts like habeas corpus and citizen rights trace their lineage to Roman jurisprudence. Even the language of modern law, words like justice, contract, and testimony, echo Latin roots. But these achievements coexisted with systemic inequities. The same laws that protected property rights also enshrined slavery. The same courts that adjudicated disputes among elites met out brutal punishment to the marginalized. Roman law was a mirror of Roman society, brilliant in conception, ruthless in execution. For the poor, encounters with the legal system were rarely neutral. To be summoned to court was to stand exposed before power. To face punishment was to be humiliated before the crowd. Yet memory of injustice lingered. Graffiti carved into walls lamented wrongful convictions. Prayers to household gods begged for deliverance from corrupt officials. Popular tales of divine retribution, where Jupiter struck down liars or Mars avenged the oppressed, reflected a longing for fairness beyond human institutions. In the myths, gods often punished hubris, the arrogance of mortals who defied the natural order. In Rome, the law served a similar function, punishing those who challenged the hierarchy of empire. But hubris, whether divine or human, never disappeared. Rebellions smoldered in the provinces, riots erupted in the streets. The cycle of control and defiance mirrored the cycles of myth, where sons overthrew fathers, and fate humbled even the mighty. Ultimately, Roman law was inseparable from Roman power. It codified conquest, legitimized hierarchy, and sanctified the authority of emperors. Its courts and punishments projected the majesty of the state, reminding subjects, citizen and slave alike, that Rome was supreme. And yet, for all its might, the law was fragile, dependent on the very order it sought to enforce. When that order faltered, when famine struck, when armies mutinied, when emperors fell, the grandeur of law crumbled with startling speed. In the shadows of the forums, basilicas, and the arches of the Colosseum, justice was both exalted and cheapened, celebrated in rhetoric, yet compromised in practice. For the poor who crowded Rome's tenements, the law was not an abstract ideal, but a daily reality. Sometimes shield, more often burden, always inescapable.
Mortality and memory. Death was no stranger to Rome. In the crowded streets and fetid tenements of the imperial capital, mortality lurked in every shadow. In the stagnant water of public fountains, in the smoke-filled rooms of insulae, in the wounds of laborers and the fevers of infants. The grandeur of marble temples and triumphal arches offered little protection from the fragility of life. For the vast majority of Romans, existence was short, uncertain, and perilously close to the brink. Infant mortality was staggering. Archaeological studies of Roman cemeteries reveal that nearly half of all children died before reaching the age of 10. Many perished in their first year. Mothers faced constant peril in childbirth, often succumbing to complications that modern medicine would easily prevent. Plagues swept the city with terrifying regularity. Measles, smallpox, and malaria decimating populations already weakened by hunger and overcrowding. In such conditions, life expectancy hovered barely above 30. Old age, so often celebrated in myth and literature, was a rare privilege for the few who survived youth's gauntlet. Epidemics struck without warning. The Antonine plague of the 2nd century CE, likely smallpox, claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, crippling the Roman army and shaking imperial confidence. Later, the plague of Cyprian in the 3rd century inflicted similar devastation, emptying streets and filling mass graves. To live in Rome was to live with the constant knowledge that death could come suddenly, from disease, from accident, from fire, or from famine. In death as in life, Rome was a city of stark contrasts. The wealthy commemorated themselves with grandeur. Mausoleums lined the roads leading into the city, adorned with inscriptions proclaiming lineage, virtue, and civic service. The tomb of Cecilia Metella, rising along the Appian Way, testified to the enduring ambition of Rome's elite, to be remembered not merely by family, but by all who passed. Funerals of the wealthy were public spectacles. Musicians played dirges, professional mourners wailed, actors wearing wax masks of ancestors marched in procession, reminding onlookers of the family's noble heritage. Eulogies extolled the deceased's accomplishments, blending personal grief with civic pride. Wealth secured memory, transforming the departed into enduring presences within the urban landscape. For the poor, death was anonymous. Unable to afford tombs or funerary rites, most were interred in mass graves, particularly outside the city walls. These pits, layered with corpses and lime, offered neither marker nor ritual, only disposal. Family members might toss a handful of earth or a whispered prayer, but the dead vanished quickly from public memory. Within a generation, even their names were forgotten. Cremation, once common, gave way over time to inhumation as Christianity spread new beliefs about bodily resurrection. But for the poor, burial practices changed little. Simplicity and anonymity endured. The cycle of life and death turned without interruption, each new birth shadowed by the likelihood of early loss. Roman beliefs about the afterlife were complex and evolving. Traditional religion emphasized ritual over doctrine. Proper burial ensured the soul's peace,
while neglect condemned it to restless wandering. The dead were honored during festivals like Parentalia, when families visited tombs, offering wine, flowers, and food to their ancestors. Even the humblest households maintained lareria, shrines to household spirits, where daily offerings linked the living and the dead. Philosophical schools offered competing visions. Stoics counseled acceptance of death as natural and inevitable. Epicureans dismissed fear of the afterlife, insisting that death was mere dissolution. Mystery cults, like those of Isis or Mithras, promised personal salvation and eternal life to initiates. Christianity, emerging from the empire's margins, proclaimed resurrection and a universal hope that appealed powerfully to slaves and the poor, offering dignity to those forgotten by worldly hierarchies. In Rome, memory was inseparable from power. To be remembered was to endure. To be forgotten was to vanish. Elite families inscribed names in stone, ensuring their lineage would echo through centuries. Emperors erected colossal monuments, arches, columns, temples that immortalized their victories. Even in death, they sought to dominate the cityscape, their presence unavoidable to those who walked its streets. The poor left little trace. Their labor built the aqueducts, paved the roads, raised the amphitheaters, yet history rarely recorded their names. Graffiti on walls, crude drawings, pleas for love, curses against landlords provide fleeting glimpses into their lives. Pottery shards, discarded tools, humble altars testified to their existence more eloquently than any epic poem. Archaeology, more than literature, restores their memory, revealing a city sustained by invisible hands. The myths of Greece and Rome, though populated by gods and heroes, were ultimately human stories. Prometheus's defiance, Pandora's curiosity, Heracles' labors, all mirrored the struggles of ordinary people, striving against hardship, enduring suffering, seeking meaning in the face of inevitable death. The gods, for all their power, were bound by fate. Mortals, for all their weakness, aspired to transcendence. In this tension lay the enduring resonance of myth. For the poor of Rome, myth offered solace and explanation. Pandora's jar accounted for the world's miseries. Prometheus's fire symbolized resilience and ingenuity. The cycles of divine rebellion, Uranus, Cronus, Zeus, echoed the cycles of human power. Republic to empire, emperor to usurper, order to chaos. History and myth blurred, each illuminating the other. Hope, the last spirit in Pandora's jar, lingered in Rome's crowded streets. It glimmered in the laughter of children playing amid ruins, in the prayers whispered at street shrines, in the small acts of kindness that sustained community amid hardship. Hope endured in the belief that the gods might intervene, that fortune might turn, that tomorrow might bring relief. When Christianity spread, hope took new form, a promise of justice beyond the grave, of eternal life for the humble and oppressed. In this new faith, the forgotten found dignity. The anonymous poor gained a voice. Yet even as Rome transformed, the fundamental human questions remained unchanged. Why do we suffer? How do we endure? What legacy do we leave behind? The ruins of Rome still inspire awe. The Colosseum's arches, the Pantheon's dome, the aqueducts striding across valleys. Yet these monuments tell only part of the story. The true foundation of the empire was laid by those who lived and died in obscurity. Laborers, slaves, artisans, and mothers whose names are lost but whose toil built the eternal city. Their story is the counterpoint to myth. Where the gods battled for supremacy and heroes sought glory, the poor of Rome fought daily for survival. Their struggles lacked epic poets, yet they were no less heroic. In their endurance, they embodied the very qualities myth celebrated: resilience, courage, and the stubborn flame of hope that no tyranny, divine or human, could fully extinguish.
Myth and reality intertwined. From chaos to Caesar, from Olympus to the Forum, the story of Greece and Rome is one of contrasts and continuities. Myths explained the cosmos. History revealed its cost. The gods reflected human flaws. Mortals aspired to divine ideals. Power rose and fell in cycles, each generation rebelling against the last, yet human nature remained constant, yearning, striving, suffering, hoping. In the end, perhaps this is why these stories endure. They remind us that grandeur and fragility are inseparable, that civilization is built on both marble and mud, that even amid suffering, hope persists. The last gift in Pandora's jar, the one thing left when all else escaped, still flickers across the centuries, illuminating not only the lives of gods and emperors, but of countless unnamed men and women whose quiet endurance made history possible. Good night.